Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the U.S. Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a hearing on 1,000 days of Russia's war on the people of Ukraine. With that in mind, I'd also like to remind everyone that audience members are reminded they may not interrupt the hearing or block the door or entryway. Violators will be removed by the Capitol Police. At this time, I'll be offering an opening statement, and then we'll proceed to Ranking Member Steve Cohen, and then we'll also proceed to Department of Commerce Representative Mr. Don Graves. This commission will come to order. Good afternoon to all who have joined us today. Today we mark a somber anniversary, 1,000 days since the invasion of war criminal Putin's full-scale entry into the country of Ukraine. Every Ukrainian remembers that night very clearly. War criminal Putin told his troops the Ukrainians would welcome them. The West underestimated the resolve of the courageous people of Ukraine. Estimating that Kyiv would fall in days, Kyiv stands today and will stand until the end of history because of the Ukraine is strong. And let us be clear, support for Ukraine will always be bipartisan, and I am grateful to stand with my friends and colleagues across the aisle in support of freedom, life, and liberty for the people of Ukraine. And it's not just bipartisan. When members of the Senate arrive, you're going to find out it's bicameral too, which is truly remarkable. The invasion did not begin on February 24, 2022, or even March 2014. On December 5, 1994, with the signing of the Budapest Memorandum, independent Ukraine denuclearized, removing its #1 deterrent voluntarily in exchange for guarantees by Russia, the United States, and United Kingdom of sovereign borders and independence. Ukraine lived up to its commitments. The guarantors have shamefully failed to defend territorial integrity. When Russia invaded for the first time under the Obama administration in 2014, the Western response was insufficient in condemning the illegal occupation of Transnistria of Moldova, just as in 2008 when Russia invaded the nation of Georgia, and when war criminal Putin propped up mass murderer Bashar al-Assad in the still ongoing slaughter of millions of Syrians. We have crossed so many red lines at this point, we can no longer see them, but dictators with rule of gun are playing the long game. Following the Biden-Harris surrender from Afghanistan, war criminal Putin saw an opportunity to do what he had prepared through his massacres in Syria, with the backing of Tehran, Beijing, Damascus, and Pyongyang. He put in motion the full-scale invasion of Ukraine to reassemble the failed Soviet Union, directly threatening NATO members of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. His fake claims of blocking borders with NATO countries were an excuse to invade Ukraine and fake news. It has nothing to do with NATO being bordering the Russian Federation. Sadly, unfounded escalation fears have thus prevented victory from becoming a reality. Unprecedented restrictions that should have never been applied to an ally have led tragically to countless Ukrainian deaths and have put the world in greater danger than ever before. I look forward to working with President Donald Trump to rebuild the deterrence that the Biden-Harris regime has squandered and to end this one-sided war, one with Ukrainian sovereign borders, recognizing that it was President Trump who put the Javelin missiles in Ukraine to block an invasion. It was Donald Trump who put American troops in Poland for the first time in history to block war criminal Putin. It was Donald Trump that stopped Nord Stream 2 to stop the financing by war criminal Putin. As we've seen repeatedly, war criminal Putin adheres to no international standards, agreements, or treaties. Putin will always lie, and he's already lied to President-elect Donald Trump, who, in good faith and a genuine concern for peace, asked him to not further escalate the war. War criminal Putin followed this request with the largest salvo of attacks on Ukrainian civilian targets of homes and utility infrastructure in many months, with 200 missiles and drones. The only way to deter Putin is with strength. When the United States hesitates, Russia escalates with the addition of commanding additional North Korean mercenaries, thousands of mercenaries into the region. Today's grim milestone represents a threat to all American families. Putin has made clear he has no intention of stopping at Ukraine. In fact, Putin's army of thugs are wearing patches depicting the hammer and sickle over Alaska, the state of Alaska. Putin has his eyes on all former Soviet republics, including Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, of NATO membership. Ukrainians are defending their country with incredible bravery in spite of limited resources and arbitrary constraints. Peace through strength is ensuring that Ukraine can strike legitimate military targets within Russia, which is the launch sites, to protect the people from further attack, providing real, meaningful security guarantees, not only for Ukraine's benefit, but to protect the rest of the world from the advance of dictatorial aggression. These are challenging times for Ukraine on the battlefield. I know that the witnesses today will highlight the urgency of giving Ukraine what it needs to defeat war criminal Putin, not just freeze the war in place. Ultimately, we cannot ask Ukraine to weather another 1,000 days without using all the tools at disposal. First, we're honored to welcome His Excellency Andrei Sybiha, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. Then we hear from Dr. Hanna Hopko, former chairwoman of the Ukrainian Rada's Foreign Affairs Committee and co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Next, we hear from Maria Kucherinka, the head of the Russia Studies at the Come Back Alive Foundation. And then we are grateful to have Dr. Andrew Mikta, the director and senior fellow at Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Geostrategy Initiative. With this, I turn to immediately my co-chair, Steve Cohen, for any remarks, after which we will also be hearing a pre-recorded video from President Vladimir Zelenskyy before returning to to the Foreign Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have brief remarks, but I'd like to recognize Speaker Emeritus Pelosi, who has joined us. And if you'd like to make any remarks, I'd be glad to yield you some time. No, he's not a Republican. He's Commerce Department.
Well, I will do this. I came to listen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Congressman Cohen, and for your leadership on the Helsinki Commission, and to you, Chairman Wilson. We've worked together on this. How many times have we shared the pen, one version or another? We have learned so much from the people of Ukraine about courage, about respect for democracy, and their protection of their democracy is a protection of democracy everywhere. I have been particularly interested in what has happened to women and children in Ukraine, acts of horror that the First Lady of Ukraine has come and spoken to us about here. So in terms of what it means to the people, what it means to the principle of democracy, we're very eager to hear the status of things today, but also to sing the praises of the people of Ukraine and the leadership of Ukraine for your courage, for the courage and the example to the world. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Emeritus. It's been my honor to work on this commission for a while, and Joe Wilson and I get along very, very well. And I have to commend him for his strong stance on Ukraine and support for Ukraine. And at this time, he's seeking a higher position on the Foreign Affairs Committee, which I hope he gets. But some of his support for Ukraine may be used against him because of the change of administrations. And I think Chairman Mr. Wilson shows honor and integrity and be commended. But thank you. It's sad that we have to recognize these 1,000 days. It shouldn't have been 1,000 days. It should have been 0 days. There should be no concept in anybody's mind, let alone a person who's recommended to be the head of intelligence in this country, that this war was caused by Putin and not by the United States and not by Ukraine. Putin invaded Ukraine and thought it was going to be a 2-day walk in the park, and it wasn't. Ukrainian people, Ukrainian military have been heroic and strong and shown great fortitude and love for their country. I've been proud to support Ukraine, visit with President Zelenskyy and others in Ukraine, and pledge my continued support and hope that the Congress will do the same. If Putin wants to be known as Putin the Great, Peter the Great next in line. He wants to be Putin the Great. And he's made Russia a country to where it's not even safe for a ballet dancer to go on a balcony. Going on a balcony is a dangerous activity in Russia. It's become a just horrific situation, what Putin has done to people who just write letters. I think the ballet dancer had written in 2022 against the war, about peace, and about his family, grandfather maybe and grandmother, who were Ukraine military and maybe a Ukraine artist. And while that tweet has been deleted, it wasn't deleted probably from Putin's mind. And unfortunately, the ballet dancer is no longer with us. I don't have much hope for the continued American support which Ukraine needs, but they'll have mine, and I think they'll have most of the Democrats. And hopefully they'll have Republicans like Joe Wilson, too. There are not a lot of Joe Wilsons, but there's one of them, and that's a good one for me. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Steve Cohen of Tennessee. And we now proceed to Mr. Don Graves of the U.S. Department of Commerce.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Speaker Emerita. Thank you for convening this important hearing. It's an honor to represent the Department of Commerce and the Biden-Harris administration here on the Helsinki Commission, and to have this important dialogue with you today about the importance of maintaining our support and our resolve in countering Russian aggression, supporting Ukraine's security and prosperity on an ongoing basis. I would agree that it is a sobering reality that after 1,000 days, Russia's full-scale illegal war of aggression against Ukraine is still ongoing. It's an utter shame for the world. But I see this as a testament, Mr. Chairman, as you suggested, to the courage, the grit, the determination of the Ukrainian people and their leadership, and to the steadfast support of the United States and other democracies around the world for standing up for what is right. Our efforts at the Department of Commerce and across the administration to hold Russia accountable and support Ukraine are spearheaded by our efforts to focus on enforcing export controls. It's a prime example of our work to strategically address threats to our national security and our foreign policy, as well as to regional stability. When malign actors like Putin act abroad and use military force that threatens our friends, our shared values, and our collective security, the Commerce Department and the entire Biden-Harris administration have stepped up. I won't go into details, Mr. Chairman, about it. Suffice it to say that our export controls have been used to effectively to impose comprehensive restrictions that have effectively prevented Putin's military machine of aggression from doing much more destruction than it's already done against the Ukrainian people and Ukraine's infrastructure. Importantly, we've built and maintained a coalition of 39 export control partners across the globe who are substantially aligned with us against Russia and have imposed similar measures on both Russia and Belarus. We're also working closely with dozens of other nations to cut off transshipment of controlled items to Russia. We're collaborating with our sister agencies across the federal government. These export controls and sanctions have restricted Russia's access to items, including the technology, that are needed for its weapons. But it can only be as effective as our partnership and our leadership as a country around the world, getting other countries to align with us, with our partners in Ukraine, to prevent Putin's war machine from being restocked and restored. The United States and our allies have a duty not only to support Ukraine, but also to show that democracies will stand up to aggressors for as long as it takes. So today I'm proud to say that the Commerce Department and the entire U.S. government, bicamerally, bipartisan, here and in the executive branch, that we stand with Ukraine, that we will stand with Ukraine going forward. We're inspired by Ukraine's courage, by its strength, and the remaining time that I have left as a Deputy Secretary at the Commerce Department, I'll remain committed to using our tools strategically to impose additional costs on Putin and Russia and its enablers, and to support Ukraine and its people as they confront this existential threat to its survival. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing, and to our witnesses for their knowledge and expertise. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary. We now will be having a video that will be presented by President Vladimir Zelenskyy, and then we would proceed with other members of the panel to make opening statements, beginning with Congressman Jim Costa from California, and then we'll proceed with all members who would like to make an opening statement before we proceed to the Foreign Minister. Mr. President.
Dear Chairman Wilson and Cardin, dear members of the Helsinki Commission, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm deeply grateful to you for the support throughout these 1,000 days of full-scale war. When the war began on February 24, nearly 3 years ago, many doubted if Ukraine could withstand the attacks. But most people around the world believed, or at least hoped, that Russia's evil would not succeed. There was overwhelming sense of how unjust Russia's aggression was, an attempt to destroy our country and occupy our land and force Ukrainians out of their homes. We all remember those days. Our soldiers destroyed Russian paratroopers, and ordinary people in towns and villages stopped Russian tanks with their bare hands. Long convoys of Russian troops moved through Ukraine while the world slowly overcame the initial shock and began uniting to support us. Like every nation, Ukraine deserves freedom. And now, 1,000 days and countless battles later, Ukraine remains strong. We have a fully functioning state. We control most of our land every day and night. We shoot down Russian missiles and Iranian drones. Putin has not achieved a single major goal. Ukrainian children are still learning in Ukrainian schools. In most cities and towns, life goes on despite the war. For the second year in a row, our economy is growing and we are rebuilding. Even now, the arrival of thousands of North Korean troops to support Russia will not break us. If the United States finds a way to make such strong, decisive choices, our strengths now and the strength of the entire free world for decades to come is possible thanks to the incredible support of the United States, millions of Americans united against evil. Thank you for this. And I thank the entire US Congress for standing with us. These 1,000 days of war have been a path we've walked together. Now we must keep going until we reach the day we all dream of, a day of true and lasting peace. Lasting. The kind of peace that anyone would wish for themselves. Dear friends, the idea of the Helsinki Commission is inseparable from the idea of truth, and none of us should be deceived. We cannot call a pause in the war peace. We cannot say that justice has been solved while Russian war criminals are still smiling. We cannot claim that the war is over if Russia is allowed to use again the skills it gained from this war. But this is happening right now. Russia is teaching North Korea the methods of modern warfare. It's helping Iran. It has already been caught supporting the Houthis. Russia is fueling chaos in Africa. All of this is a global threat, and Russia is stoking its flames through the fire of this war. This war in Europe, this war of aggression against Ukraine. That's why it is here in Ukraine truth must prevail. This war must end in accordance with international law, with peace built through strength, so that Russian forces can never again shatter peace anywhere in the world. And we do need the tribunal for Putin and bodies. We cannot silence the issue. Time is going, people die, and there is no outcome in sight. We should stop financing Russia's war machine at the expense of oil revenues. And all the frozen Russian assets must be put to use for weapons and recovery to protect us from Putin. It is fair. And I'm sure we can achieve this together, and only together, Ukraine, the United States, Europe, and all our allies and partners. The day must come when Putin's smile is gone forever. The day must come when Putin's smile is gone forever. God bless America. Slava Ukraini.
And again, it's so humbling and inspiring to see President Zelenskyy in his presentation. I've had a remarkable year to be with him at the Munich Security Conference in Germany, and then at the Shangri-La Conference in Singapore, and the Villa d'Este Conference in Italy, and then last month to be here in Washington as he appeared. And so what a leader. And I like to point out to people, to me, he is the ultimate symbol of non-corruption. And that is on the very day that there was a Russian invasion convoy 30 miles long, 10 miles from his office, President Biden did correctly. He offered him a ride out of town, out of the country. And he turned it down and said that indeed we need arms, not a ride. And to me, that's the definition of someone who is not corrupt, somebody who is standing for his people. And with that, I now refer to Congressman Jim Costa of California.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cohen. The bipartisanship you've demonstrated in our efforts to support our allies with Ukraine, I think, is to be highlighted, along with the bipartisan support we've received from the Congress and the Biden administration and Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi. I think that it's fitting and appropriate after 1,000 days of war that we hear from this distinguished panel as to the challenges that we face. I want to ask the panel members in your comments to address whether or not it would be beneficial to pass a supplemental Ukraine security package before the end of the year. Would that be beneficial? Is it needed right now? I'd like in your comments to also respond to what you need right now to help you with Ukraine on the battlefield. President Biden's lifting of the use of TACMs and other military equipment on the battlefield, I think, is a good sign. I wished it had taken place, frankly, months ago. But let me just say that I think the Biden administration has, in the 1,000 days, done a good job in rallying NATO and our allies to the support of Ukraine. I think our collective efforts on sanctions and the freezing of assets, again, are important. Those assets, not just the interest rates on those assets, but ultimately the entire assets that have been withheld should be, when a ceasefire and a peace ultimately is achieved, used for the reconstruction of Ukraine. That would be the right thing to do with these Russian assets that are currently being frozen. Let me close by saying the following. Today, modern-day Russia is a syndicate masquerading as a country with a mob boss called Putin. Let me repeat that. Today, modern Russia is a syndicate masquerading as a country, and the mob boss Putin is a war criminal. He's a war criminal for the things that he's done to the people of Ukraine. Bombing of hospitals, bombing of schools, kidnapping over 50,000 Ukrainian children. The list goes on and on and on for the atrocities that President Putin has pursued for his dream of whatever, in attacking an unprovoked attack on a peaceful neighbor that has created devastation for the people of Ukraine. And so therefore, I think we need to tell the truth. Speaker Metros Pelosi knew my mother, and she told me a long time ago, Jim, the truth is the truth. The truth is President Putin is a war criminal, and those are the facts, and he ultimately must pay for the atrocities that he has committed upon the people of Ukraine, but even beyond that. And so I look forward to the testimony of this distinguished panel, and I thank the leadership that Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Cohen have provided with the Helsinki Commission. It's fitting and appropriate after 1,000 days we hold this hearing today. Thank you.
And one change, and thank you very much, Congressman Costa. Due to scheduling, we're going to call on the Foreign Minister, Andres Sabella, and to give testimony because he has a scheduling conflict. Then we'll come back to any opening statement of other members who obviously are passionate in their support of the people of Ukraine. Foreign Minister.
Dear Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Cohen, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, dear members of the Helsinki Commission, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be at the Helsinki Commission today. I appreciate all of your support for Ukraine throughout 1,000 days of Russia's full-scale aggression. And I would like to thank you from the bottom of the hearts of all Ukrainians. Really appreciate. Thank you for drawing the attention of members of Congress to the need to bring the aggressor to justice. When I departed from Kiev on November 17th, Russia launched one of its largest air attacks against Ukraine. Together with my wife and children, we spent a sleepless night under loud explosions, just like thousands of other Ukrainian families. Like thousands of other parents, we have to reply to our kids who are asking us why this terror still continues. 210 drones and missiles, including hypersonic and ballistic. Russians once again targeted civilians, critical infrastructure, energy grid, and even nuclear energy systems. Many people were left without power and heating. 10 people were killed in Odessa and 12 in Sumy, including 2 children. Overall, Russia killed 659 Ukrainian children since the start of its full-scale invasion. Fortunately, most of the targets were intercepted this time, and we are grateful to the United States for its support, for its constant support in strengthening our air shield. But this attack once again underscores the need to put an end to Russian terror and aggression through strong and decisive action. There can be no alternative to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. The Helsinki Commission has always had a historic mission to defend freedom, human rights, and international law. This mission is especially relevant now, when we see a new axis of rogue regimes challenging global order. Russia, Iran, North Korea work together to challenge the existing international order. All 3 regimes support each other, including with military assistance. Together, they destabilize 3 regions: Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. All 3 regimes violate human rights on an industrial scale. This is what they want to impose on the world. They pretend to be fighting against the United States and the West, but in fact, the only thing that unites them is lawlessness. This axis is an existential challenge for the West. We need peace through strength. The United States cannot afford to look weak. Russia, Iran, and North Korea will perceive any sign of weakness as an invitation to directly harm American interests and security. Right now, we see new attempts by the Kremlin to use nuclear saber-rattling to scare the West. Their updated nuclear doctrine and public rhetoric on the use of nuclear weapons are nothing more than blackmail. They have used it many times before when strong decisions were made. We must remain cold-headed, clear-eyed, and not give in to fear. We in Ukraine know that in a situation of existential fight for life, there is no half solution. Half measures only bring half results, and in life of death situations, a half solution is death, not life. The situation in Ukraine is not just conflict between two states. It's an aggression of one state against another. There can be no alternative to the peace formula and the restoration of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine and the world. There can be no alternative to justice. Russia must be held accountable for the crime of aggression against Ukraine and all atrocities that followed, including the crime of genocide. We call on the US Congress to adopt legislation recognizing Russian actions in Ukraine as genocide of the Ukrainian people. The legal grounds are sufficient. The deportation of at least 20,000 Ukrainian children, genocidal propaganda on television, murder with an intent to destroy the Ukrainian national group, sexual violence, and attempts to create unbearable conditions of life. All these elements classified by the Convention on Genocide are present in Russian aggression against Ukraine. Moscow's attempts to destroy the Ukrainian nation are not new. 90 years ago, they already tried and killed millions of Ukrainians by hunger during the Holodomor genocide. We must ensure accountability for all past and present crimes of the Kremlin. Today, Russia systematically violates the Geneva Conventions, as well as the laws and customs of war. Some of the most horrible crimes against humanity it commits are executions of our prisoners of war. Their numbers have grown significantly this year. We are currently investigating the murder of 124 prisoners of war. According to the UN data, 95% of Ukrainian prisoners of war suffered various forms of torture in Russian captivity. Many of them returned with severe physical and mental damage. Thousands of Ukrainian prisoners of war, as well as thousands of civilian hostages and political prisoners, remain in Russia captivity. We need joint efforts to pressure Russia and ensure humane treatment, as well as proper access to international monitors and medics. Most importantly, we must work to free all of our people and return all of our kidnapped children. In this sense, I underscore the importance of the recent Montreal Pledge and urge everyone to join these humanitarian efforts. Millions of Ukrainians face torture, repression, and violations of their human rights in the occupied territories. This includes persecution of minorities, religious leaders, and communities. Ukraine's largest Muslim community, the Crimean Tatars, have been deprived of their homes for the second time in 1 century. These indigenous people have no other homeland than Crimea, but the Russian regime banned the Majlis and pushed Crimean Tatar leaders and communities out of the peninsula. When facing such a brutal and lawless regime as Putin's Russia, there can be no alternative to peace through strength. Ukraine will not accept any initiative that suggests compromises on our sovereignty or territorial integrity. We will not accept any initiatives developed without our participation. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. We will not accept any land for peace deals. Such ideas will only mean leaving millions of people in the hands of the aggressor and subject to genocide, torture, and oppression. Furthermore, rewarding Russia with territorial gains will not restore peace, but instead provoke further aggression. This is appeasement, not peace. Appeasement has never worked in the past, and it will not work now. There can be no alternative to the victory plan proposed by President Zelenskyy. Russia shows no intention to restore peace. Instead, it continues to speak the language of ultimatums and attack Ukraine every day and night. Only strong and decisive steps will force the aggressor to accept a just peace. We need to raise the price for this war for Putin to the level when he understands that he cannot continue his aggression. The Ukrainian people are paying the highest price for this war, but the price of appeasement will be even higher for the entire world. This is why we need real peace, not peace at any cost. Let's stand united and strong. Let's act together to protect our shared values, enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act and other fundamental documents. Let me wish you fruitful hearings today. Slava Ukraini and God bless America.
And Foreign Minister Sabiha, thank you so much for your clarity and the courage again of the people of Ukraine. How inspiring. And we understand you have scheduling, and this time we'll proceed again with any opening statement that anyone would like to make, and in the interest of bipartisanship, we'll call on Congressman Robert Aderholt of Alabama.
Thank you. I just want to say it's great to be here, and I know we're short for time, and I know, so I'm going to defer and look forward to this hearing. And I thank you, Chairman, for having this hearing today so we can find out what really the impact of what this is going on with Russia.
Thank you so much. And we now proceed to Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois.
Again, in the interest of time, very briefly, I just returned from Ukraine, the fourth time since the 1,000-day war, Putin's war. And I think it is fair to say, at least to stake out what we consider victory. Victory must mean a victory on the battlefield and a lasting peace through security assurances, which must include, in the final analysis, membership in NATO, restoring the country and its original borders, rebuilding this country to its full potential, and holding those accountable. As I stood on the mass graves in Bucha, we owe it to them, and for all the reasons we fought the Second World War, to move forward to a just peace. Thank you.
And I'm grateful to use Chairman's privilege and recognize former Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you. I had the privilege of saying some remarks earlier about the urgency of our support for Ukraine to continue, not only to continue, but even to accelerate. I was pleased that Madam Ambassador was here as well. We've all worked with her for a long period of time. But really, this distinguished panel is what we came to hear. So with associating myself with the remarks that others have made about our role, the courage of the Ukrainian people, and the need for the decisions to be made by the Ukrainian people about how we go forward, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Speaker. We now proceed to the co-chair of the Bulgaria Caucus, Brad Schneider of Illinois.
Thank you. I want to thank my friend. I want to thank all of you for being here. I, too, will associate myself with all of the remarks, and I think what the foreign minister said succinctly is 1,000 days of war, 1,000 days of atrocity, but 1,000 days of courage and strength from the Ukrainian people. And it's imperative that we are successful. Success will not come without sacrifice and will not come without great cost. But failure, as the foreign minister said, will carry far greater cost. And we have to make sure that Ukraine is successful and the United States stands with Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Congressman. We now conclude with opening statements by Congresswoman Deborah Ross of North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to hear from the panel. But just to let you know, I'm co-chair of the Moldova Caucus. And I want people to also know Moldova has done everything that it can to help Ukraine. And, of course, it has fought back against the Russians in their most recent election. And so I stand fully with Ukraine and also understand that if Ukraine falls, so will other countries. But I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We now proceed to our panel, and we're so grateful to have Dr. Hannah Hopko, again, a former chairwoman of the Rada's Foreign Affairs Committee and the co-founder of International Center for Ukrainian Victory and we are grateful to have you here. And what we'll be doing is we're going to try to be 5 minutes for each individual, and then restrain members of Congress very much that they stick to 5 minutes so that as many people can participate as possible. Thank you.
Dear Chairman Wilson, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, and distinguished members of Helsinki Commission. Let me express my profound appreciations to the Helsinki Commission for championing an ambitious international agenda to support Ukraine. Moreover, I would like to extend my deep gratitude to American people for your continuous support for our fight for life, dignity, and freedom. Our minister just mentioned the devastating cost of Russian war and genocide. So 10 years of Russian ongoing aggression. Ukrainians have been fighting Russian war for 3,926 days until today. Even after the horror of the last 1,000 days, Ukrainians are not giving up. And I'm here today to testify and just to say that this war is winnable one. And actually, I would like to say that 1,000 days of war, a decade since a Russian Federation decided Ukrainian pursuit of democracy deserved the seizure of Ukrainian Crimea in February 2014. Sadly, I need to talk about the lack of full commitment of Western democracies to safeguard the rules-based international order. Russia's destruction of Ukraine continues because Ukraine is under-supported, while Russia is overprotected by red lines, self-restrictions, and escalation management. 1,000 days ago, we were expected to die as a nation in 3 days. Russian soldiers packed parade uniforms for their triumph over Kiev. They were a hit list circulating of Ukrainian intelligentsia to be liquidated. I was on a list, as many others were. Ukrainians spawn and all choose to resist. So 1,000 days of indecision by Western leaders have allowed Moscow to wreak havoc on Ukraine, devastating human losses, depopulated cities, destroyed infrastructure, ruined economy, healthcare. No other war today threatens the future of free world modern Russian war. At the same time, Russia gets protected by Western red lines. Ukraine pays with life for every single second of illusion of control over the trajectory of outcome of the war. Since 2014, Russia has been seeking the destruction of both the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian nation. And I'm supporting Chairman Wilson saying that after the Soviet Union collapsed, this was the end of communist ideology, but not the end of Russian imperialism. This is why I'm very also thankful to the Helsinki Commission for organizing hearings on decolonization, de-imperialization of Russia, because as our minister just said, genocidal war of Russian imperialism we faced for centuries, and not just Ukrainians, also Chechens and other nations. So this is why decolonization, de-imperialization is key. Moscow's criminal actions have one main objective: to destroy the viability of the existence of Ukrainians as a separate national and ethnic group. So, 10 years ago, I was here on the Hill in my capacity as the chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of Ukrainian Parliament, asking for support for the Ukraine Freedom Support Act. 10 years ago, I couldn't imagine that after 10 years after adoption of this Ukraine Freedom Support Act, I will come here and ask him to adopt the Ukraine Victory Support Act. And it's not just now Russia alone, it's axis of evil states which are supplying Russia with ballistic missiles, North Korean troops. So it's a higher time to adopt an axis of evil defeat act and support Ukrainian victory. And let me say that this war is winnable because Ukrainians and Ukraine has defied expectations, sinking the Russian Black Fleet without a Ukrainian navy, defending Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, liberating Kherson, fighting North Korean soldiers in Kursk. So my minister, I support the recognition of Russian aggression as a genocide. Also, all sovereign assets of Russia must be confiscated and support Ukrainian military defense. Ukraine must be offered NATO membership, which is important for all of us because Ukraine could contribute a lot to the alliance and the European security. So as a mother of 13 years old daughter Sofia, When I was staying in Kiev in that night of the full-scale war began, so my daughter was crossing the border. And I was in Kiev with my husband. And I was not knowing what happened. And I'm very thankful to God that I'm alive and speaking today. And my daughter asked me a question, Mom, you know all these Western leaders. Why you are in Kiev under bombs and I have to leave my country? Why after 8 years of your advocacy, you haven't succeeded not stopping and preventing Russia? I couldn't answer to my daughter. I was crying. So here today, I'm asking American people, asking American Congress to give Ukraine everything needed to defeat Russian imperialism. That my grandkids and Ukrainians who lost their beloved one, they will know that justice prevails and American leadership, American credibility, and Russia will never achieve that end of America means end of American power. Thank you for having me today. God bless America. God bless your wisdom to help us to achieve such sustainable peace that never again Russia or China or other axis of evil states attack a sovereign nation.
And Dr. Hupko, thank you so much for your insight and testimony. We now proceed to Maria Kucher-Enka, and we're so grateful for your heading the Russian studies at the Come Back Alive Foundation.
Thank you. Dear Chairman Wilson, Speaker Pelosi, distinguished members of the Helsinki Commission, honorable participants of today's hearing. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here and for all American support provided to my country. The very formulation of the topic of our hearings leads us to the answer what kind of reaction was necessary to Russian threat, and when, actually, reaction was needed. Russia's war against Ukraine began with the annexation of Crimea and aggression in the eastern part of Ukraine in 2014. And the fact that only from 2022 the world began to talk about Russia's war against Ukraine and not the Ukrainian crisis, as it was in the previous 8 years, created the prerequisites for today's scale of war. Russia's war against Ukraine cannot be considered a problem affecting only Ukraine and Russia, or even only Europe. There is no isolated wars in 21st century. The brutal attack on February 24th of 2022 proved that Russia will not stop. Where Russia does not resort to the physical occupation, it undermines world security in one way or another. Russia will use all occupied territories as a bridgehead, and this applies not only to Ukraine, but also to Georgia and Moldova. Developments with Georgian elections proved that persons related to the General Directorate of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, more widely known as the spin doctors of a Wagner group, are actively interfering in what is happening in this country. We are talking about Alexander Malkevich, who is not only involved in the interference of 2020 American elections, but also currently working in the newly occupied territories of Ukraine and in the international recognized territory of Georgia. During these elections, he worked for the Georgian Dream. The situation is not better in Moldova, where Russia used Transnistria as one of the tools of electoral pressure and additional pressure on the security situation in the region. One of the most vivid examples of the Russian threat demonstrated by this phase of hostilities is the food crisis. The world learned that a number of developing countries are critically dependent on Ukrainian grain, when this grain became very difficult to transport due to the scale of hostilities started by Russia. The world learned that Russia steals Ukrainian grain from the occupied territories and tries to trade it as its own. The world learned that Russia was purposefully burning and shelling Ukrainian agricultural lands to blackmail a large part of the world population with their artificially created famine. But this is far from the only instrument of destabilization that Russia shamelessly uses with the beginning of this stage of war. The presence of the Russian special services under the guise of so-called private military companies helps it support dictatorial regimes, additionally invests in the blurring of the rules as a concept. During the research of the Wagner Group, we at the Come Back Alive Foundation counted the presence of the representatives of this group affiliated with the General Directorate of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation in more than 70 countries. We are talking not only about militants, but also about spin doctors, military advisors, and media specialists, which means about the entire spectrum of the military and non-military influence. It does not matter what this group is called at the moment, Wagner, Africa Corps, or anything else. It is about the work of the Russian special services to create entire logistic network to destabilize the security situation around the world. The arms traffic between Russian Federation, Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria, organized by Russian special services, and the latest tragic events in the Middle East are directly connected. Moscow is confidently building not only an axis of evil, Russia, China, Iran and its proxy, and North Korea, but also shedding blood on individual nodes of this network. Although the focus of the Russian Federation effort is the subjugation of Ukraine, it does not mean that the situation of October of 2023 in the Middle East will be not repeated elsewhere. Taiwan, Middle East, Africa are all on the menu of the axis of evil. And that is why we must react in a consolidated manner to this complex challenge. Russia cannot be allowed to systematically break the rules and occupy more and more territories, resulting in greater and greater casualties. Russia cannot be bought off some individual territories or countries, hoping that this is where it will stop. It was actually the bitter lesson of 2022 for Ukraine and the world. This approach does not work. Russia cannot be allowed to conduct a symmetrical operation to increase its influence around the world and organize and support arms traffic between dictatorial regimes. Only together, based on the principle of territorial integrity as one of the main principles of the international law, on the readiness to affirm the force of law and not the law of force, we will be able to repel the axis of evil. And this is the main lesson that should be learned from this 1,000 days and the previous 2,926 days of the war, from the beginning of annexation of Crimea to the beginning of this stage of hostilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kucherenko. And we appreciate your insight and dedication. And we're so grateful to have with us Dr. Andrew Mikta, who is a senior fellow at Atlantic Council Scowcroft Geostrategy Initiative. Dr. Mikta.
Thank you very much, Chairman Wilson, Speaker Pelosi, honorable ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to speak on lessons learned from almost 3 years of Russia's war on Ukraine. Please allow me to enter these initial comments into the record. Russia's war on Ukraine is a system-transforming conflict, marking unequivocally the end of 3 post-Cold War decades of relative peace. To understand the sources and potential end states of this war, we need to understand the systemic nature of Vladimir Putin's Russia. Russia is a quintessentially revisionist state, aligned with China, Iran, and North Korea, what I call 4 states that together form an axis of dictatorships, intent on overthrowing the international system established by the United States and its democratic allies after World War II. For over 2 decades now, Russia has been relitigating the post-Cold War settlement, driven by its determination to rebuild the inner core of its former empire and establish a sphere of influence in Central and Eastern Europe and beyond. The war in Ukraine is not a one-off event. It is a manifestation of Vladimir Putin's drive to restore what he calls Veliki Ruski Mir, Pax Russica, that is rooted in the fundamentals of Russian thinking about geopolitics and strategy, that it formed its formative experience as an empire. This strategic culture sees its empire as rooted in the Eastern Slavic core of 3 nations, the Great Russians, the Little Russians or Ukrainians, and the White Russians, Belarusians. Russian imperialism perceives itself to be in fundamental civilizational opposition to the West. Putin's insistence that, quote, there's no such thing as a Ukrainian nation, and his focus on Eurasianism as a pathway to de-Westernize Russia align with the core tenets of Russian imperialism. At a risk of over-rationalizing history, I submit that there are striking parallels between the trajectory followed by Germany after its defeat in World War I and the road Russia has traveled since the end of the Cold War. The dominant narrative produced for domestic consumption during both the Weimar Republic in Germany and the Yeltsin era in Russia was one of betrayal rather than defeat. In Germany, the Dolchstoßlegende, or stab-in-the-back myth, claimed that Germany was never defeated but rather betrayed. In Russia, Putin has offered the population a similar narrative, blaming the West for the alleged treachery that brought down the Soviet Union. I bring this up because this imperial narrative, much as it led to the rise of Hitler in Germany, continues to sustain Putin's revisionism in Central and Eastern Europe. According to this view, the great Russian nation was robbed of its greatness by the United States and the West, and hence any action to remedy this perceived injustice is justified in the eyes of Russian imperialists. Consequently, and this is key, The threat Russia poses to Central and Eastern Europe and to peace and stability worldwide will not abate so long as the Russian revisionist narrative holds. Until then, Russia will remain not an acute but a chronic threat to the United States and its allies. Allow me to turn to Ukraine. Today, the country is locked in an existential struggle for survival as a free and sovereign nation, while Russia systematically obliterates the country's infrastructure, industry, cultural heritage, and most of all, kills its people, military and civilian. Because the United States and its NATO allies, while providing vital support, have prioritized controlling escalation, and Putin has effectively played the nuclear card, Ukraine has been forced to fight on Russia's terms, i.e. a war of attrition. It should be stated plainly that unless the West changes its approach to aiding Ukraine, the current strategy will likely lead to its defeat. A case in point, when Ukraine became independent, it had some 51 million people. In 2022, when Russia invaded for the second time, it had about 40 million people. Today, by my estimates, somewhere between 27 and 30 million citizens are left in the country. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, it is not just that Ukraine is running out of weapons and munitions, it is running out of people, with Russia now enjoying a 4-to-1 population advantage. Russia's victory over Ukraine would have devastating consequences for the United States' global position and for NATO and the West as a whole. It would demonstrate to our adversaries that we have neither the staying power nor the determination to confront them. Putin's Russia is not fighting Ukraine. Rather, according to Moscow's narrative, Russia is fighting the United States, NATO, and what they call the collective West. Putin has framed this war as a civilization war. And should Russia prevail, he will score a civilizational win that will embolden other members of the axis of dictatorships to push even more vigorously against the United States and our allies. Ukraine's defeat will increase the risk that as regional power balances unravel in Europe, the Middle East, and in Asia, America is pulled into a global war. The stakes could not be higher. We need to stand by Ukraine, but we also need a change in strategy. If Ukraine is to have a chance at an equitable peace settlement, it needs to get the weapons and munitions it needs in quantities it needs. But most of all, we need to lift the restrictions on their use to allow Ukraine to impose real costs on Russia. Only if Putin realizes that he can't win this war at an acceptable cost will there be a chance for a negotiated end to this conflict. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mikta. And as we proceed, each person on the panel will be provided 5 minutes, and it'll be strictly enforced because politicians sometimes can go beyond 5 minutes. And so we will proceed, and I'll be the first. And at this, again, I want to thank each of you for being here. I want to thank the staff that have been so helpful in getting this together, and the persons in the audience. It's wonderful to have the interest that there is. One point that I want to really reiterate on behalf of to the American people, and that is there's really only one reason why war criminal Putin invaded Ukraine, and it's because he wants to reinstitute and recreate the failed Soviet Union, and he wants to create that empire. And there was previously the Soviet Empire with nomenclatura, the elite running the and being beneficial to the elite, not to the people of Russia or the Russian or the Soviet republics. And now it's, Congressman Costa is right, it's a mafia with oligarchs who are being benefited, and the people of Russia are being taken advantage of. And it's particularly sad for me because I've had wonderful visits to Russia, from St. Petersburg to Novosibirsk. One time I was there to see a billboard that said, "Welcome to Novosibirsk. Times have changed." It said in English, the Chicago of Siberia. Chelyabinsk is the sister city of my home community of Columbia, South Carolina. Wonderful visits to St. Petersburg. And so it's really disappointing to me about the people of Russia. And another point is that it's been stated that Putin acted out of self-defense because of the threat of NATO. NATO is a defensive organization. He's had a border with NATO since 1949. It's called Norway. to claim that he was trying to avoid a border with NATO and Ukraine actually failed. As we know, Finland has an 830-mile border with the Russian Federation and now a member of NATO, and how extraordinary the unintended consequence of Finland and Sweden giving up 200 years of neutrality. Indeed, to me, is clear that war criminal Putin is on a path to self-destruction. But it has nothing to do, it was purely made up, his concerns about NATO. With that in mind, and Dr. Hopko and everyone, sanctions are so important to me, and I want to congratulate the Department of Commerce for truly enforcing these, but it needs to be enforced so that indeed the oligarchs are affected. That's who the sanctions will be against. And with that in mind, beginning with each one of you, what more can be done by the United States, our NATO allies, the European Union, the 39 countries that have been identified as supporting a free and vibrant Ukraine?
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Thank you for these important questions. So actually, we expected after the Russian invasion back in 2014 that sanction policy will become a diplomatic leverage to prevent the full-scale war. And actually now we are here in DC also advocating for the continuation of the sanctions against Nord Stream 2, which is really important to continue. And also an international humanitarian military mission must be deployed to provide air defense for Ukraine's nuclear infrastructure. Because what Russia did for the first time this year in August, during the massive missile attack in combination of ballistic cruise missiles, kamikaze drones, for the first time they used nuclear warheads just to destroy different substations and near the nuclear power plants in different regions of Ukraine. So I think it's really important to avoid the nuclear accident in Ukraine, this international humanitarian military mission. And we are very thankful for Biden giving permission for ATACMS, even if still there are some restrictions on the use of Western-made weapons against Russia by UK and other nations. But winter will be very tough. But we have this resilience, and we know that Russia wants to freeze Ukrainians, weaponize winter, and we need America to green light the decision for Poland and Romania, because we are now advocating for the air defense shield over Western Ukraine, Odessa, which is critically important because we are exporting grain, and let's not allow Russia to weaponize food as weaponization of hunger. So key main issues. Sanctions, besides Nord Stream 2, there are a list of sanctions, especially on oil and Russian gas. And I think this is a great opportunity for America to export more LNG to European market instead of Russian LNG. And it's crucially important. And Western components, which are being found in ballistic missiles produced by North Korea, which they gave to Russia and they used against us in 2024. Can you imagine that we found components from the UK and the US manufactured in 2023 in North Korean missiles, which were used against us this year? So this is another issue, and I know that Helsinki Commission focused on this sanctions policy as well. So this is main area, and let's not allow Russia to produce more Kinzhals, more drones with the usage of Western components, which are critical for their military industry. And of course, what Russia is really afraid of, Chairman Wilson, I have some gift for you. Maybe I will give it to you because you mentioned that what Putin is the biggest fear of Mr. Putin, the war criminal, that Russia will repeat the destiny of Soviet Union. This is what he is afraid of. And I think we don't have this fear because we, together with Helsinki Commission, for many years we are advocating this make Russia small again. And this is in this picture you will see Moscovia, the size of Moscovia and how Russia is now. So the attacks from Russia in Baltic Sea and the statement that they want to redraw the maritime borders in Baltic Sea, it's another way of imperialism. So I think they are afraid of Russia becoming a size of Moscow, and this is what Putin publicly said. But de-imperialization is the key, and this T-shirt is a gift from our Ukraine Victory Center and for other honorable members.
And again, thank you for your passion, and we're so grateful. We now proceed to Ranking Member Steve Cohen of Tennessee.
Mr. Costa has requested some time, and I'll yield to him.
Thank you very much, my friend. Hopefully, President Biden's actions that he took yesterday will soon be followed by the UK and France on weapon systems that Ukraine now has to attack interests in Russia. My question is President-elect Trump has talked about his ability to negotiate his influence with President Putin. I'd like to get your take because earlier this year, President Putin established the conditions for a ceasefire as 1, Ukraine agreeing not to become a member of the EU, 2, not ever becoming a member of NATO, 3, demilitarizing the Ukrainian forces, and then we begin to discuss, or Putin said, negotiating territory. I think those terms are unacceptable to President Zelenskyy or any Ukrainian leadership. I'd like your comment and what additional support we need to provide and what you'd be looking for with President-elect Trump when he takes office after January 20th.
Thank you for this question. Yes, you mentioned these conditions provided by Putin. It is actually the repetition of this so-called Istanbul document in which he actually made an ultimatum for us, not based on any logic or any common sense. It was only based on his wish to subjugate Ukraine. But first of all, I need to say that this experience of so-called ceasefire was already in our history when it was that period of war during from 2014 till 2022, actually we got a lot of attempts to establish ceasefire. It was so-called summer ceasefire, autumn ceasefire, other different ceasefires related to some celebrations or some other occasions. But in the case of absence of real practical mechanism on the ground to prevent this violation of ceasefire, we only got the OSCE mission, which was only monitoring mission, not some military mission or not some mission of peacekeeping. It was only more and more attempts to negotiate the Russian conditions, not the conditions of settlement of this conflict or not of the conditions of Ukrainian victory. But when it turns to additional aid to Ukrainian side, first of all, yes, actually I need to mention this air defense systems, missiles, and so on and so on, but which is really crucial for us. It is things related to the secondary sanctions, first of all, following of the secondary sanctions, which really can put Russian Federation in the inconvenient state. And also, we would like to underline the importance of transferring of frozen actives of Russian Federation to support of Ukraine. And also, I think that we should think in a common way about some asymmetrical actions against Russian Federation. And first of all, against some actions of Russian Federation under the false flags. For instance, the flag of criminal groups or so-called PMCs. I think that in this dimension, we, Ukraine and US and our European partners can work together. And we, as Ukrainian experts who is dealing with this topic like on the daily basis, I think that in this case, we can be not only a receiver of your aid, but we also can be a contributor to our common security. And in this way, I think that we can cooperate with our main partner, US, and we can do our best in this dimension. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we now proceed to Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the distinguished panel for their very informative and current, up-to-date presentation. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cohen, for being true to the purpose and the mission of the Helsinki Commission and how relevant it is to our discussion today. We have votes coming up soon, but I wanted to stay here for the full presentation because this is the most important thing that we could be doing, is to taking us to this next step. The beautiful presentation of President Zelenskyy, not beautiful in terms of its strength, in terms of its courage, in terms of its purpose, and the presentations that you have made have been very important. My question, we've talked about weapons and use and that, is about person power. We saw at the beginning of the war, the Russians were using poor people and minorities and the rest, not going into the more sophisticated areas where St. Petersburg and the rest, where it might turn public opinion against the use of the war, the purpose of the war, because of deaths to families there. And now I'd like you to tell us where you see it, because isn't it a sign of weakness on the part of Putin that he has to go outside the country and get North Koreans to come in and fight his war? What is the attitude that you see from the Russian people? We read about the bonus that families get if their child dies in war. They get money and they're poor, and so it's a compensation, as sad as that might seem to all of us. Who's fighting this war? What impact does it have on the support in Russia for continuation of the war? And again, how can Putin talk about being a strong Russia if he has to go to North Korea to get his troops there? One more thing is well, I won't go into it. We'll just go there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Speaker Pelosi. And let me say that you have addressed one of the most important aspects of this war. So far, Putin believes that he can win at an acceptable cost because the people he brings into the battlefield are either people from impoverished areas of the Russian Federation, the Buryats and other minorities. He's avoiding recruiting in the major cities because the minute he goes to Moscow, Petersburg, and other areas, the dynamic changes. He's no longer pulling poor people from faraway places. He is now pulling what we might call the Russian middle class. And then the families of those men and women would respond very differently. I think the Korean presence is both an outrage and a challenge to us because he's brought Asian troops into the European theater. But you're right, I would argue that he also does not want to go in the second mobilization round or third mobilization round to people that we have in those major cities, because he remembers very well what can happen when Russian women go into the streets, when young men and women try to escape. Mothers in particular. And if you remember the coup attempts when Yeltsin climbed on top of the tank, it was the Russian women who came in and changed the dynamic of the whole situation. So I think as long as he believes he can continue at an acceptable cost, relying either on people from impoverished areas, criminals, or foreign troops, like we've done this with we've seen this with the North Koreans, which, by the way, should be absolutely unacceptable to us, to have him bring in foreign troops from a country that's not a declared combatant into effect a combatant situation. That requires the strongest response from our side. Mr. Chairman, to your question and the question of Mr. Costa, I will actually say the most important thing to assist Ukraine is probably not directly connected to Ukraine. First of all, it's allied solidarity. If he believes that he can fracture us, that he can break our consensus on supporting Ukraine, he's winning. Secondly, for the European allies, rearmament is the way to assist Ukraine indirectly. Why? Because that man understands only hard power. And if he can blackmail and threaten the disarmed Europeans, then he thinks he's got the room to maneuver. So what we've been trying to convince our European allies, and this should be a message, not to the allies on the flank who are doing their job, the Finns, the Scandinavians, the Balts, the Poles are arming, but that should be the message to the allies farther west. They need to do their part. And finally, he has to believe he can't cut a deal that would take him to his, in effect, pre-1999 situation. What he is trying to get is he's trying to offer terms of surrender. He wants a sphere of influence in Europe, and he wants the United States out of Europe. So much is riding on Ukraine. If Ukraine emerges from this crisis as a vibrant, successful democracy, the whole region will change. There are no one-country solutions to the security dilemmas of the region. If Ukraine thrives, the dictatorship in Belarus will implode. It will be a matter of time. If you look at the young men and women who stood in the streets in Minsk when the election was stolen, that's where Ukraine was in 1991. That's an emerging national identity. That's the drive for democracy and freedom. We're looking at the last imperial power in Europe. And if you look at the number of nations, the Russians like to call them nationalities, that are within the frame of the Russian Federation, that's what we're looking at. And finally, to our European allies, the best way to communicate to the Russians that there is no going back, seize their assets that are currently in the West. And number two, convince our allies that if we start really physically dismantling the Nord Stream pipelines, he will get the message.
One thing that we've been trying to do without success was to declare Russia a terrorist state so that the effect of the sanctions would be more forceful. I don't know if it's too late for that. Could you speak to that?
It's never too late, Madam Speaker, but I would also add to this, in light of everything that Russia has done, why are we still maintaining the Russia-NATO Founding Act? Why are we still pretending that what he's done has not effectively undone the entire framework post-Cold War? He has suffered no consequences. In 2008, he invaded Georgia. He got a slap on the wrist. Nord Stream 1 was completed. He invaded Crimea in 2014. Nord Stream 2 was started. Again, a slap on the wrist. He butchered Syria at Aleppo. He went into the Middle East as a great, deal maker in the region, controlling migration flows. He expected the same thing in Ukraine. And Madam Speaker, I tell you, had the Ukrainians not fought, we would probably have been in a horrible situation today. So they're fighting for the stability and security of Europe, the entire balance of power in the region. They're the best NATO allies that we don't have in the alliance, and I think that's something we should redress.
Mr. Chairman, just say in closing that when Svetlana is here and we talk about Belarus and you addressed that thrilling excitement in the streets about Belarus, that gives us hope that there's some there. In other words, we should be doing more because it's not in a vacuum. It's with opportunity, shall we say, in Belarus. And then also, in terms of what the foreign minister said, the price of appeasement is just too great. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Dr. Michter. We now proceed to Don Graves of the Department of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Distinguished speakers, thank you for your compelling testimony. I would just remind us that in his national security strategy, President Biden assessed that the most significant strategic challenge we face as we pursue a free, open, prosperous, and secure world is from powers like Russia that apply authoritarian governance with a revisionist foreign policy. Dr. Michter, you talked about this in your testimony to Putin's drive to restore Pax Russica, and all of you talked about the imperialistic vision of Russia trying to create this former empire that dominates a sphere of influence in a region or a significant chunk of the world. And Dr. Hopko, I hear you on the issues of U.S. and Western technologies falling into the hands of this authoritarian leader. While our export controls have restricted Russia's access to items like microtechnology that are needed for its weapons to continue to prosecute the war, more needs to be done. It's a global challenge that all of our partners and allies across the world need to engage in. It demands creative thinking from all of us. It's why we're constantly working with the U.S. industry and the industries of our partners and allies to enhance the due diligence that they provide to detect evasion efforts that are going on, sometimes in third-party countries, transshipment in countries that do not subscribe to our values or worldview. It also requires commitment by all those who value this free and open and prosperous world to stick together to further restrict Russia's access to these technologies. I will say that one of the other things that is often missed, I know we talk a fair amount about the value to the American public for sticking with our partners and allies, in addition to having good partners and allies around the world. There's an economic benefit to the United States on this issue in particular. The knockoff technology that shows up on the battlefield using our intellectual property or parts and weapons that use our brands but are not actually produced by the United States, that has an impact on our economy as well. So it's important for us to continue to prosecute these efforts with our partners and allies. I will just ask well, let me just say, with an imminent change in the administration, I think we all are concerned, rightly or wrongly, the consequences of a potentially sudden erosion of U.S. Support for Ukraine could be deadly and could resonate beyond the region. So it's not an issue of party or politics, but of humanity and our commitment to a lasting peace. So in the time remaining, if any of you would like to give an answer as to your belief as to what would happen should the U.S. support for Ukraine have an expiration date.
So if you ask me, what are the success stories of the U.S. foreign policy in last decades? So I think if you need success story, Ukraine is the place to get it. And actually, this success story will restore the American credibility after Afghanistan and what's happening now in the Middle East, because we do connect the dots between the weak reaction on the Crimea annexation in 2014, when we expected to see the Sixth Fleet of the US, because US is a security guarantor to Ukraine, and what's happening now in the Red Sea, in Middle East, and what could happen in Indo-Pacific with the attack on Taiwan, also your partner. So Ukraine wants to become and will become, God will bless this, we will become a part of NATO, the EU, because not just because we deserve, because it's also in your interest. And actually, as a part of Ukraine geopolitical integration, Ukraine will become a defense hub located in Ukraine, the defense hub of Europe, because we have the critical raw minerals. We already, in the battlefield, used our innovations. This is the war drones, the war of drones. I'm jet lagging a little bit, sorry. And then also radio electronic technologies and others. So many countries which are sending their instructors, they are learning from Ukraine. So I think Ukraine is an asset of strategic partnership where we will benefit both nations and people. So this is why I think we have to think from the perspective what is the strategic value of Ukraine for American people? And also, why, when we are mentioning, there was the question from Congressman Costa asking about what's happened if Trump. So we do believe that it's in Trump's interest to restore peace by restoring territorial integrity of Ukraine. And Crimea is Ukraine. And Crimea also is an attractive place for investment, gas industry. Why? One of the reasons why Russia invaded Ukraine, because Putin had this fear that Ukraine, from importer of gas, one day will become exporter using ExxonMobil and other technologies. So there are many arguments. I could tell for hours why it's in the interest of the US to make Ukraine successful, America great, and actually how to make world safe. And I'm really very thankful. And I think this is the time, the higher time to, as I call, to adopt the Victory Support Act in Congress and actually to start the new page, not as long as it takes. As fast Russian imperialism will be defeated, as Dr. Michta mentioned, no more Russian imperialism and genocidal war with Chinese expansionists and others. It's in your interest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Secretary Don Graves. And we now proceed for our last questioner, and that's the ranking member, Steve Cohen of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be fairly quick. Dr. Hopko, we provided Ukraine with some F-16s, I believe, and some other countries did. How have they been? I know one was shot down. Have you been using the F-16s, and have they proved to be important?
I'm very thankful for F-16 because there are our colleagues, very famous pilots, Juice and Moonfish. They were here in DC back in June 2022. Unfortunately, both of them now in the Heaven Forces of Ukraine. And Moonfish paid a price when the most massive missile attack happened in August 26. He was killed during the special operations defending Ukraine. But we need more F-16s. And since I'm here, so I would kindly ask you to provide more F-16s. And actually, we are now adopting our legislation to have retired pilots in Ukraine with their experience. And also, we need F-16s with radars and Link 16s, because unfortunately, F-16s without proper equipment are not competitive with Russian fighter jets. This is what we need.
We've got boats, so if I understand that, I appreciate it. I've read something about some lines, cables being cut in the Baltics between Germany, maybe, and Finland, and maybe Sweden and another country. Are you familiar? Any of y'all familiar with that? You are, Dr. Mikta. Do you believe that's Russia?
I always ask cui bono, who does it serve? I think in terms of how this war has unfolded, the Russians have tried to intrude into our economic space. They've tried to intrude into our information space. They have violated NATO countries' airspace, trying to test what the limits are. Of course, I don't have any certainty as to who actually did that, and that requires access to intel assessments going forward. But I would like to add one more point here about how we go forward with this, because I think it concerns our economic policy. There was a mention here of components that originate in the West making their way to Russian weapon systems. I would submit to everyone on this panel that we need to bring national security priorities back into economic policy making. For 3 decades since the end of the Cold War, we've basically removed them. We operated on the assumption that globalization, export-driven modernization would somehow transform authoritarian communist dictatorial regimes. And I remember one important political figure saying that China would become a responsible stakeholder in the international system. During the Cold War, we had COCOM restrictions in NATO. You couldn't export dual-use technology to the Soviet Union. We took jewels in the crown of Western technology, handed it over to 1.4 billion communist state on the assumption that something different would happen. So I would urge you to bring the conversation back into how we decouple our critical supply chains from Russia. We cannot, from China, sorry, we cannot depend on them for supply chains that are critical in the national emergency in the event of a war. And to the question about what failure in Ukraine would mean, it would be another case of deterrence failing and the loss of American credibility. And we've seen this repeatedly when not only attack on Ukraine in 2022, Hamas attacking the closest ally of the United States in 2023, Iran launching a direct attack on Israel. And if we do not restore deterrence, we're going to be risking a wider conflict, because in the final analysis, general war in the Second World War did not start because Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland. It started because regional balances in Asia, Manchuria, then in Europe, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and then finally Poland were unraveling. We should not allow for that to happen.
Dr. Mikta, did you see the reported statement by one of the leaders in Russia that Russia had helped Mr. Trump be successful, and that they expected that Mr. Trump would reciprocate because that's the way they do business? Did you see that?
I've seen all sorts of Russian propaganda. I don't put any weight in it. I think the Russians are trying to shape the narrative, if you will. I think what's going to happen actually is going to be a very tough negotiation going forward. Putin's terms are, in my view, unacceptable. What he's asking of Ukraine is surrender. That is, in effect, what he's been arguing for since the very beginning. I always believe that the incoming administration, whether Democrat or Republican, has the right to shape its own position, and I don't put any stake in any credibility in what the Russians are saying, especially in the open media.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony,
Thank you,
and appreciate the foreign minister here as well. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. As we conclude, I'd like to thank the witnesses. Each of you are special on behalf of the people of Ukraine, but more importantly, to avoid a greater war, because that's what Putin is really proposing. With that, I want to also thank the staff who have been so helpful and the commissioners. This is tremendous to have the speaker here. And additionally, I want to thank, this is unique, this commission, we also have the executive branch, a very rare occasion that we have the executive branch. And then I'm treading on ice, but this is bipartisan, Republican, Democrat in the House, but also the Senate members. And I regret that with all that's going on in the Senate, that so many of our leaders, including Ben Cardin of Maryland, good Democrat, Roger Wicker, good Republican of Mississippi, if they were here, I shouldn't speak for them except for one thing. I know they would say amen, and that is support for the people of Ukraine. And so it's bipartisan, bicameral. I'm not sure I can say that about anything else. But anyway, thank you, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.